We are recording. So again, welcome everybody to the Monday, March 20th meeting of Kubernetes SIG Apps. I'm Kenneth Owens. I'll be facilitating. No announcements. We have two discussion topics. And the first one is decoupling Taint Manager. It's an enhancement. Who would like to begin this discussion? Or what was the topic
Hello.
that you?
Yeah, this is Yuan. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Seems your voice is breaking. I don't know. Can you hear me well? Okay, great. So may I share my screen?
Sure, I'll enable sharing.
Okay, I really have some problem to.
Not sure how sharing can. It's easiest to make a co-host. You should be able to share your screen.
Share my screen, but I have some different network tracking.
Is there anything particular that you want to share your screen on? We can share the screen for you as well. Looks like we lost Yuan. Ravi, there is Yuan back.
Okay, sorry. I'm rejoining again. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear. Ken, you're muted.
Yeah, you're a lot more clear. Let me give you co-host again so you can try sharing again.
Okay. Okay, let me share my desktop. Can you see my screen now? Why this is here? Okay, apologize for the delay. Yeah, I had a connecting and yeah, networking issue. Yeah, redying. Hopefully you can hear me well now. Okay, should I start? And I can give a quick overview of this proposal on decoupling taint-based pod eviction from node lifecycle controller. How do I move this? And then it's a little bit weird why it's here. Okay, anyway. Okay, so we present an initial idea a few weeks ago in the meeting. And now we put together a CAP and submit a PR. So today we'd like to give a little bit more and detailed presentation on the idea, collect the feedback and input, of course, and we'd like to get a review and hopefully approval and on this proposal. So, okay, let me start some background and the motivation. So the idea is that currently, and there are a component called the life cycle controller, and we believe it's owned by the SIG apps. So it has the basically two and basic functionalities. One is and add the node tent if a node is detected unhealthy. For example, if you cannot reach the Kubernetes of the nodes. The second is have another component and called a tent manager. It's basically is act on the tents, right? Delete the ports on those unhealthy and tented nodes. Of course, it can act on any type of this and no execute tents, not only and added by this and node lifecycle controller. So in this proposal, and we are proposing, and so we'd like to and move this and the tent manager basically is this action parts from this and the node side and controller. So make it two separate controllers. The one controller is add the tents, right? When it detects a node is not healthy, just like what it does today. The second one is perform and the node deletion and on nodes tented with the node and no execute effect. So the second thing is, of course, by doing this, then the user and is allowed to can opt out this default behavior. Today, this node tent manager, they can replace it with any of their custom and node and or tent manager. So that's some background, and I'm going to describe a little bit more the motivation use cases in more detail. So any questions so far or comments? Okay, if not, I'm moving on. So the key motivation, and I mentioned NATO, and so is we feel in a lot of use cases, more advanced use cases or workload management, the current this default tent manager, right, is just evict or delete all these ports, running ports on attended or unhealthy and nodes is not flexible enough or sufficient enough and to manage and some more advanced or complex use cases. For example, and some cases in particular for some stateful workloads, depending on the data, whether or not we want to keep the data. And so we may and not want to just randomly or arbitrarily and delete running ports when a node even not healthy, right? And so this also sometimes may need to check with the application controller or even external system get the additional information that make a decision. So the default tent manager and cannot and support this kind of use cases. The second reason also and from the Kubernetes 1.27 and the current this flag, the feature flag command line, the enable tent manager basically is you can enable turn it on or turn it off, right? By default, and the default tent manager is turn on, but you can turn it off now. Is going to be removed. So it's basically there are no way and you can replace this default and behavior and with a customer behavior and from the 1.27. And we also want to mention, right, from the functionality perspective, right, this two and we think is two separate and functions, right? One is added tents, and it basically focuses on just a subset of the node unhealthy thing, right? Is node unhealthy networking connection issue, we add the tents. Another piece is this tent manager is act on this tents, but it deleting the ports and removing the ports. It can act on any type of the port and node tents. We think it's also would be very and useful and decouple these two separate and functions. Of course, it's we provide and not more the flexibility and to manage and these two separate and functions. So one of the key comments and we present at both the SIG nodes and the SIG apps, you said, why don't you just use the tolerations to do this thing, right? You can set the toleration infinitely and then prevent the tent manager removing or deleting the running ports, or you customize with whatever value. So here is the some of the arguments, and we put together. We think it's not the toleration mechanism is not flexible or good enough to handle the case. And the first thing is toleration is a single value, also somehow static, right? It's very hard. For example, if I want to make sure my data is checkpointed or saved or migrated to a safe place, then I can remove the ports and the associated position volume, right? It's very hard to set a toleration value and say it's 10 seconds or 20 seconds and to make this work. But if I want to dynamically and update this and update the toleration value, right? It has through this and the webhook admission controller and the other thing, it will have to require we add it to every single port in the clusters. Specifically, this custom tolerations, and we have to inject this toleration to all ports and using this mutating webhook. So this can cause a lot of issues. One is it could even potentially interfere with the admission plugins, and it will apply the default tolerations. The second thing is it could, if there are some old versions and upgrade other thing, so this toleration upgrade to the webhook also can cause some conflicts. And also who can do that? This RBAC and the mechanism and have to be put in place. So also another reason, and we found out, is this correlation, and then of course you can not leverage and the flexibility. So I want to get some additional information from external API to get this and information. Basically, it's hard to interact with other controller or the workload application management system to get additional information. So in our practice, we just noticed the toleration itself, right? It's on one way, it's a little bit of static concept. It's hard to set. The second is if you update this and the tolerations values, and it has to interact with not this and the admission webhook can have the conflicting and create conflicts with the existing and admission plugin, also the RBAC mechanism and other webhook, and the interaction dependency thing, and can be in the very complex. So by seeing all this, so then this proposal is again, yeah, we want to separate these two functionality and provide this flexibility. So by default, the behavior will be still the same as the current one. It's just different from current one is this tenant manager is run as a separate controller. The second thing is we just can leverage the kube controller manager, right? I have a new flag, and is this not a new flag? Leverage this and kube controller manager flag, right? You can add this called tenant manager, right? Then you can turn it on or turn it off, and by default, you just use the default tenant manager. So if you turn it off, then you can run whatever, yeah, your custom and tenant manager. Okay, I'm pausing here. So any questions, feedback? I don't know my co-author, Ravi, do you have anything to add or comment? I don't know if Andrea is here or Deep is here. Okay, so any question, comments?
One question here. Did you add a section for alternatively adding fields in tolerations so that they are useful for the use case instead of, again, disabling the controller?
Oh, we don't need to.
Do you explore enhancing the tolerations API?
Okay, so maybe let me move to here and yeah, a little bit to clarify this and from the proposal perspective. Yeah. So if you are not familiar with this, is current, you can think it is current and implementation, right? There are a single node lifecycle controller and two key functions. On the left side, this is the functions to add the node tent. The second one, that's what we call the tent manager, right? They are internal, they are a flag called enable tent manager. If it's true, it will create and start this tent manager and watch the node's condition, then perform and this tent based and port eviction. But this is the flag I mentioned will be removed from Kubernetes and 127. So this is the proposal, and then we have two separate controllers, right? Managed by the controller and manager. So the node lifecycle controller basically, yeah, will be this, but by moving out this and the tend manager, it's will work and as it is, right? And watch for the node healthy and conditions and add the tents. Another separate one, basically we move this out, right? You do the similar thing and the default watch the nodes, then you can do things. But so we just need for this one, nothing API and the change, right? You know, the controller manager, and you can just add or disable a controller or disable a controller, right? By specifying this and flag controllers. For example, in future, we have a tent manager. Just if you specify by default and it's on, so it's tent manager. If you want to turn it off, right? You just specify controllers and the dash or minus the controller manager, right? This will disable the default one, and you can run your customer's one. I don't know if I answer your question, if that's what you are asking. Yeah, so.
No.
Okay, so
My question is, did you explore the option of enhancing the tolerations API so that your use case is served? But yeah, so that's one question. And follow up, the design that you just showed actually looks odd to me, because there is the component that adds the taint. And if you go, can you go to the diagrams?
yeah,
The diagrams.
diagram, okay.
Yeah, so the node lifecycle controller is adding a taint.
Yes.
And so that's not being disabled, like that, you don't want to disable that. But then you're disabling the no execute manager, which means basically that there is an API field that is not, being respected at all. Like, did you consider instead basically disabling the node lifecycle controller part that adds the taint?
Yes,
because
so
it's go ahead, sorry.
yeah. So like I said, I hope it's clear enough here. And the question asked is that can we leverage or enhance the tent and based API or whatever? Yeah, I want probably a little bit of clarification what's the enhancement and would it be possible? But here I hope the idea is clear, right? The functions now, like I said, this current one do these two things. So the proposal is quite simple. Just said we don't want it and cobbled together as a single and a controller, right? So these pieces will still and remains inside the node lifecycle controller. So we assume the behavior exactly the same as today, and it will, right? And the keep watching the node healthy, and if it's not healthy, and yeah, the node and not ready, other thing, you have to do exactly the same thing and add the node tents. That's and nothing changes here. The second piece is the default behavior of the tent manager and just the deleting and always running pods on not healthy or this with this and no execute tent will also the same, just these pieces. The only difference here is we want to move it out of this and make it a separate or independent controller and managed by the Cube controller manager, because this way and we much easier and the opt out and this default behavior and replace with a customer one. But if the customer, but the default behavior will be exactly the same as the current one. If a customer and does not care about and yeah, the creating the sum of the customer behavior, and I would guess even this should be transparent to them, and there are no any API and other changes here, right? Even this flag, the current one is flag, and it will be removed from 127, right? So then
I think Yuan, I think what Aldo is asking for is we have a taint that node lifecycle controller is adding, and we are not acting upon it in the new model. So why are we doing that? Is that the question that you're asking, Aldo?
Yes. So that's
Yeah.
part of the question. The other part is, so if you're disabling all of the no-execute taint behavior, you're basically so users won't be able to use the no-execute taints for a different purpose.
No. That is correct. So the way it works is, so it would go ahead and still apply the no execute taint. So there is a default toleration manager which applies the toleration seconds for the pod, and if that is not honored, we will go ahead and delete the pod that is supposed to get deleted if the node cannot tolerate. But the problem is the tolerations on the pod are the problem. For example, we do not know how much time a pod has to tolerate a taint. One of the examples that Yuan gave is like say if a workload needs 10 minutes or 20 minutes to be correctly checkpointed, and only after that we can actually have the toleration, have the pod be evicted. We are not able to do it now because we do not know it yet. By it, what I mean is the number of seconds that needs to be there. So we are not saying that the taint API is not available, but the toleration API is not flexible enough. That is what we are trying to say. And to answer the second part of the question, which is what are the changes that need to be made? I think the toleration seconds are good enough, but unless they are backed by like some sort of RBAC, like today anyone can add a toleration to the pod, right? So if we have some mechanism which actually limits who can actually apply those tolerations to a pod, I think that would be a good starting point for us. And dynamically changing the toleration seconds, that is something that we need to think through. Does that answer your question or questions?
I guess if this is in the alternative section, that's good. Otherwise, it needs to be added.
Oh yeah, makes sense. So yeah, I think we can put this why not tolerations in the alternatives considered section.
Yeah.
Right,
So
yes.
yeah. Yeah, thanks, Ravi, for the clarification. Yeah, again, I want to clarify the current toleration mechanism will still be there, right? We are not talking about replacing it. Just that it's not flexible or good enough for the use cases and we have here. So of course, even after these changes and the tolerations, you can still add the tolerations. But when you said, have we considered and enhancing the toleration mechanism, if you are referring that to the dynamic changes, the one and the challenges we mentioned here, just that, right? One is sometimes very hard to determine a good values for the toleration. Another thing is dynamic upgrading and or updating the toleration values. Yeah, we'll get this and involved some of this and RBAC thing and also the could potential conflicts with another webhook, other things. So that's why and we feel. So another thing and Ravi mentioned reminded me is yeah. So far you can see these two functions. This is add just a subset of the node taints, right? Unhealthy networking not reachable, but the taint manager actually can act on any kind of the no execute taint, right? Any taint. So, but the default behavior and yeah, want to change that. But if we create a customer one, of course, this customer no execute taint manager, it could potentially and act on any type of taints if it want, right? So that's the one of the use cases, and we mentioned here. Yeah, I want to cover a little bit, right? The first one is said if we can use a stateful like this thing, and we can replace this and the default taint manager, and depending on whether or not our data, right, is required or the data is already safely migrated or saved, and then we can evict or delete the ports on the tainted nodes or not. Just use a customer controller. Just last week, and I chat with yeah, I don't know if you heard of that company. It provided this middle data platform layer called and Anaxia, right? It's like a middle layer for cache data, other thing. They also mentioned that they are now running their this and the data platform layer and on Kubernetes. One of the key challenges, some of their data are cached because they get the data from the regional source, right? And no matter it's an S3 or HDFS. So if the node and is not healthy, they could easily just restart it, deploy on another nodes, and can discard all this and the data. But there are some intermediate data, and they created basically from the regional data. So they want to safely and save this data before they delete the data on the old nodes. I think that's also a good use cases. So another thing, and the second use cases I just mentioned, for our cases, is we can even create probably centralized like this pod tenant manager, right? It can handle all kinds of report and eviction cases. And no matter it's tenant not healthy or other things, one thing we notice is that sometimes the pods can stuck in the pod terminating. If it's cannot terminate in the safely, or then it could prevent even other new pods and starting. For example, if there are PVC and is bound on a pod, unless it's deleted, it cannot and start a new pod using that PVC. But whether or not you can enforce this and deletion, right? It's also depending on your list and the tenant managed behavior. So that's another and customer and tenant manager and use cases which can be use this and new mechanism, right? And just replacing the old one and to do this decision. And this is like the story 3 and also mentioned here. And finally, I think basically it's big, some use case like this and the business and some other thing. So since we have another proposal, I don't know how much time I have. So any further question, comments so far on at least hopefully some of the motivations and use cases make sense to you?
Why bring this to SIG apps as opposed to SIG scheduling?
Oh, no. So, okay. So I talked to, because the SIG scheduling co-chair and the Wei Huang is my colleague, and I talked to him. And so this component, and I believe it was owned by SIG scheduling before, but then I don't know the exact history, but then it's transferred to the SIG apps. And so it's now, and I believe owned by SIG apps, but you can correct me if wrong. But a feedback we got is we also CC the SIG scheduling. We discussed this offline with the SIG scheduling and already. So I think we'll get, and of course, feedback and input from them as well. So far, I would see the feedback is positive. Yeah, they support this proposal. But of course, we'll ping them and make sure they.
So SIG apps isn't in the owners for node lifecycle.
Yeah, I think the problem there was Klaus, who used to lead SIG scheduling. I think he wanted to work on this, and at that point of time, if I remember correctly, it has been moved to SIG apps, but Klaus has proposed it. So we continued with the because it is actually started. This controller is actually started by KCM just from the code standpoint. People wanted it to be, or Klaus wanted it to be owned by SIG apps, but he was leading SIG scheduling at that point of time, and he authored the code, and he has submitted for SIG apps to own it later. It's just a bit of history. That's all we have.
Yeah, the SIG app. Okay, SIG apps has not been active in developing or maintaining the code base and node lifecycle very. So I guess here's the thing. I don't like, all you're asking is, okay, we want to try to refactor out the no execute taint manager to run it in a separate controller with a flag so I can turn it off and replace it with my own functionality. From an API surface perspective, when the manager is doing its passes, the taint should be the same, right? So like that should show up the same to the end user. But I don't personally fully understand the implications in terms of semantics of what it would be like to remove that manager and run it in a separate controller. There could be, let's say, fiddly bits that I'm not completely aware of in doing that, right? I guess that's my only concern. Like, would the semantics actually be preserved if you did it?
Yeah, so even today, right? Oh, go ahead, Ravi.
Yeah, so I think I'm just trying to understand your question. So what you're saying is, say if we had a taint, like say if we disable the toleration, the no execute taint manager, which actually does the deletion of the pods or the eviction
No,
of the pods,
I'm saying like
would
I don't
that be a
understand. I
concern?
don't fully understand the implications for running it in a separate process that will be running concurrently with the node lifecycle controller, right? Because right now it's basically an embedded functionality imported from the scheduler package. It runs inside of the controller. So I'm not opposed to moving out. Like it sounds architecturally like not a bad decision, right? Like packaging it separately so that it can be replaced seems like a reasonable thing to do. I just don't fully understand the implications of what it means for the node lifecycle controller in terms of its semantics.
I see. So you're saying that from a node lifecycle controller, it's not managing the entire lifecycle because it's not actually deleting the pods. Is that what you're
It's
hinting
not
at?
deleting the pods, and the way it was designed and written, it is, right? So like if you rip
Yeah.
it out, does it behave the same? I guess. I don't know. Like that's the thing. I just don't know. But I mean, like I'm not diametrically opposed to this as a concept. It seems like a reasonable request in terms of I would like to be able to replace this component and turn it off and then run it with my own. I think it's reasonable from the perspective of people certainly who are running turning up their own Kubernetes, custom Kubernetes. I don't know how useful it would be across the major cloud providers because they're probably not going to disable that in the API machinery by default. They may allow you to turn up clusters like that. So getting this feature into a PaaS might not be a thing, but I'm not opposed to it in any way.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think it's a good question. Yeah, I just want to clarify two things here, right? One is even today before the 127, you can use this flag, right? And enable tenant manager force, right? And disable this behavior. Then you can run any of your customer controller here, right? One question is, yeah, we also mentioned that even inside the Kubernetes, there are some customer behavior. If all your nodes are not healthy, then this tenant manager will not deleting the running pods because that means all the workload will be shut down. And so the proposal here, of course, and finally, you may run a separate one, but hopefully it can be managed by the kube controller manager. But I still assume, yeah, probably most of the customers want, right? And just use the default one, it's okay. Then the behavior assumed will be same. But one interesting question I didn't put together and put into this proposal is the name. And after the proposal and the names are a little bit misleading, right? This is not really the node lifecycle controller or tenant manager. I would argue, and it's probably opposite, right? This is more like a tenant manager that add or remove the tenants, right, to the nodes, and it's no action. Another one probably more is like eviction manager, right? Pod eviction manager. But I didn't make the proposal, and but it's a good question. Also said, should we change the name, make it make more sense, right? And on the left side, this is more like a tenant manager, right? Adding or removing the tenant. It's another one is this pod eviction manager is based on the tenants and basically and do this and the tenant and the pod and the eviction and deleting the pods. So that's the thing. Yeah.
Jack, do you have any thoughts?
I wonder about the theoretically from what I was looking at the code, and I was, if I remember correctly, I was helping to remove the enable taint manager recently flag entirely from the code base after it got deprecated for long. Theoretically, the code seems separate, and I could be okay with the change. The one thing, as you mentioned, that I'm not sure is the implication. What will happen if you disable that? And probably that would be the stuff that would have to be explicitly called out in the enhancement of first the alternatives that Aldo mentioned. There's currently in the alternative section, there's only a short mention that, oh, if you decide to go with webhooks, that's the only thing that you can do. So probably an option that, oh, we would about expanding the API surface about the ability to modify the taint. And secondly, what happens if you disable the taint manager? Are there any implications to what will happen if you run without a taint manager? That's the
I
thing
think
that
this
I'd
is,
like to see
sorry,
pulled
Machi.
out in the enhancement before we can proceed out at least. But in general,
Yeah,
it
so
seems reasonable, I guess.
yeah, I think, Aldo, do you remember the taint-based evictions code? It has been a long time since I looked at it, but I think the enable taint manager is actually tied to taint-based evictions. Without that, the node lifecycle controller would not use taints, but it would still look at the node conditions. And depending on those node conditions, it would still go ahead and delete. That is why most likely it was named node lifecycle controller previously. I could be wrong, but if I remember correctly, that's how the code part is. Aldo, correct me if I'm wrong, if you remember.
Yeah, that's correct. That's why the existing flag makes sense to go away, because if you
Yeah,
disable the
yeah.
taint manager, it will still delete the pods.
Yep.
Just through a different mechanism.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
so
taint-based
here is some.
evictions. Sorry, Juan. I just want to
Go ahead.
complete this train of thought. Yeah.
Mm.
So to answer your question, Mache, I think even with, like if you disable the taint manager, the node lifecycle controller code path would go ahead and look at the kubelet conditions, the node conditions, and then it would go ahead and delete the pods, but it would not use the tainting mechanism. So there is an alternative, but I think taint-based evictions is already GA and people have been using it for some time. So
Yeah,
semantically, it should not be a problem. It should not
I
be a
mean,
problem is what I'm.
if you look at it at the end of the day, we will still run, at least by default, the same controllers, and the memory footprint will be similar, because the only difference would be that the taint manager coroutine, instead of being run as part of the node
Yeah.
lifecycle control, it would be started separately. So from that point, nothing changes. Only that we will, I mean, even already, both pieces are being kept separately, at least most of the time. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why, and I keep emphasizing, if the default behavior and will be same, right? Even inside, if you look at the code, it's basically depending on the current this flag, and then start and you go routine, right? And start this and taint manager and do things. And so the proposal and yeah, instead of running inside that and then load the current node cycle manager, and it's running a separate one. So the assumption is the default behavior will be exactly the same. Of course, if you want and opt and out this and the default one and replace running your own one, basically, then it won't run this functionality. Then that's customers and the responsibility, right? Whether or not it will have some implication here, and then. But for our cases, we think is we most likely will have this functionality plus our customer and the behavior, right?
Hey, this is Deep.
Okay.
I work
Okay.
with Yuan and Ravi.
Okay. Deep didn't.
I just wanted to bring up another point too about the, like, what are the implications of separating it out? So one thing I'm not sure that was pointed out was that the other effect that on the taints that the node lifecycle controller applies is no schedule, right? So it's no execute and no schedule. And just wanted to point out that for the no schedule, it's a completely separate controller, which is a scheduler that acts on the no schedule, right? And the no schedule taint can be applied by any component, like node lifecycle can apply it, or any other component. So this proposal kind of aligns with the way no schedule works, in that, you know, the node lifecycle controller, based on a certain set of node conditions, is applying the no schedule. And then the scheduler is the controller that's kind of really acting on that no schedule aspect. So that pattern is being extended to no execute taint in that the effect of the no execute is being treated by a separate controller, not the same as the one that's applying it.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, very good and yeah, addition. So hopefully this capture here and so with
Okay,
this
yeah,
proposal,
so that's, I haven't read your proposal yet. But what we've been talking about, I would like to see being plainly laid out in the proposal, such that anyone, if anyone reads it, can clearly see the path why we would be doing it this way or the other way around. And in similar fashion, the alternatives section being built with additional alternatives that were requested as well. And I think that should be sufficient for us to consider including that for 128.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for all this feedback and the question. I think very good discussion. So I know we have another agenda item, and we already using a lot of time. So how are we going to proceed? Are we done with this one or additional questions?
Yeah. Let's move to Aldo so we give it some time. I think this one will probably won't be as discussion provoking, but maybe.
Oh, okay. So I assume you are going to review it, right? We are going to address it, and hopefully we can move in the proposal forward. Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yeah, let us know. Reach out us. Yeah, we are going to discuss it on the GitHub, or we can schedule another session discuss it if any concern or comments. And,
just about this, just to finish on this topic, Kenneth, you're right. The ownership of this controller is not well established. There is no tags or anything like that. So I'll send a separate email to, I guess, SIG Apps and also SIG Node, because I know they have a stance on this, to give it a
Node's not
proper.
probably a good, well, maybe Node might be a good place for it. I don't, it's not typically the type of work that they do.
Right. But yeah, I mean, so also not the typical work we do in scheduling. So it's, yeah. Historically, it was added by scheduling, but
I wouldn't put apps at the top of the list here. Like I would think cluster lifecycle would be, if not scheduling, and then apps is concerned, right? Because like anything you do with taints and tolerations is impactful to the workload controllers for sure. And then we do own PodDB and eviction. So yeah, we got to go figure that one out too.
Okay, I'll open an issue and involve a few leads. But okay. So I guess we can move into the next topic. Is Kevin here as well? No. Okay. So do you mind giving me permissions for sharing, or do I already have it? Or you can just co-host already. Oh, did you make float co-host?
I did. Okay, you want me to make it? Okay. I made float co-host. Did you want me to make it you specifically?
Yes, please, because that's not my laptop. That's the meeting thing. Okay, thank you. So I brought up this topic before, but we decided to defer it to 128. So basically, when this is about jobs specifically, but it can be extended to any other workload API. So the behavior we have today is that when a pod fails, or when you delete a pod, it is marked as terminating, of course, but pretty much every controller treats it as inactive or something that needs to be replaced. And the job controller specifically creates a new pod immediately for that terminating pod. So there are some scenarios where this fails, such as the TensorFlow, for example. If you create a replacement pod while the other one is still closing up its connection, then you get a failure from TensorFlow. So that's the need there. So we were discussing about a few options of where to add the pod failure policy. Where to add this policy for disabling or policy to control when to replace a pod, when to create another one. So there is a question of where we want to place it. So if you remember, we recently added this pod failure policy field in the job, right? So we could add a policy inside here that controls recreation, or we could add it outside. If we add it outside, the main benefit is that well, it's semantically transferable to other APIs, such as deployment. We've heard, if you can see in the thread, we've heard from some users that they also want to control replacement in other APIs, such as deployment. So that's one big motivation to do it in there. And of course, if we do it inside the pod failure policy, then it's going to be very specific to job. I think this option that it was considered while we were hoping to do it in 127, but since we're doing it in 128 or later, I don't think we can consider this option. So really, we have these two options for a design, and I wanted to bring it to the attention of the SIG, basically to gather feedback, mostly from other users that are not batch, to know whether it's useful for a deployment API or daemon set API to also have this feature in the future.
Well, this is one thing I didn't understand, right? So deployment, by its very nature, doesn't declare the like you get n fungible pods, and there's a variation on n where it can be plus or minus what the user's declared intended. So I don't think it really applies there. StapleStat already has a mechanism for guaranteeing uniqueness and primarily implemented by storage fence in reality, but it already exists there. And then for daemon set, like it's really based on the node, right? Like daemon set isn't like based on a scaling metric or a parallelism. It's based on like a node comes in. If the selectors match up, you get a pod, right? Now there's been some desire to be able to run more than one pod belonging to a daemon set, like basically launch the new pod before. So kind of the reverse of what's happening here. But I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, Majid.
I mean, if you look at the strategies that both daemon set and deployments implement, where they give you pretty sophisticated control over how the rollout happens, whether that's a full recreate, whether that's a slow rollout of an application, that already has those capabilities. And also to what Ken was saying, basically, it's hard for me to imagine the applicability of this functionality to typical workloads controllers. For job and stateful set, like was mentioned, that already has it. It also has the ability to control how the rollout is happening, how fast, and you have the ability to affect it. So strategies.
Yeah.
So I
At a
guess
meta,
that, yeah, go ahead. That's all.
at a meta level, yeah, I'm just saying, like, I think all of the workloads controllers solve different use cases, and to me, this use case seems most tightly aligned with batch workloads. So I don't see how you would like backport the similar field into deployment or daemon set or stateful set and make it useful. But I can see how like putting it into not the spec, but putting it into the pod. What do we call that field in?
So
Archival, it was
Which
what
one?
failure
pod failure policy. Yeah, I would put it in pod. My 2 cents is I would put it in pod failure policy.
Okay, so going back to your question, Kenneth. Yeah, I agree. So a stateful set doesn't have this problem, and rather that's the only way it can work. It can only wait for the pod to finish because it uses the same pod link. Daemon set, I thought it would also replace immediately. Does it not? I actually don't know. On the top of my mind.
It does replace immediately. And then with, I think Clayton added the max surge to daemon set, right? That allowed you to surge ahead, right? So you can also now do this thing. Like the reason we didn't do that originally with daemon set is because daemon sets tend to use scarce resources. Like if you think about a load balancer that's using host network or something that's like a CSI driver, right? You only want to run one at a time, and running more than one at a time can be problematic from a node resource perspective. But then, there are enough use cases that we added a max surge to daemon set to run more than one. By default, daemon set also tries to run one per node, right? So like, I don't know, like I can't see what the utility for daemon set would be either. Like, I just don't see there are already a bunch of features that we've added for the specific behavior of the workloads that were meant to be managed by those resources. So I don't see a convergence between this feature and those, my 2 cents. Like, but I do see the usefulness for batch workloads. So I would tend to put it into the pod failure policy and probably do it under the existing cap. But
whether we do it under the existing cap or outside, I mean, it still needs a new feature gate, so might as well just start a new cap. There is no reason to. I mean, it would save a few paragraphs, but other than that, it's pretty much a new feature. So I think there is.
I'm thinking of it more from the perspective of like having a holistic design captured in one location, right? Like if we're updating this to incorporate new functionality, it might be nice to have in the same, but there's not a huge detriment to running it in a separate cap, to be honest, either.
Right. The current cap already has 2 feature gates. Okay, so I consider that, but I think I'm
Either way,
leaning
it
towards
should be fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So right. So the only use case here for deployment seems to be where you actually want just one pod. I don't know if there's a way to.
But by design, we can do that. That's not a use case for deployment. Like by design, you get fungible replicas with a replication set, and that's what it does. And trying to make it do anything else is going to be bad times.
Okay, so so in that case, you probably should be using stateful sets anyways, or an index job if we add this behavior. Philip?
Yeah, just want to say that some time ago I created this issue for deployments, which has like a couple of issues that would benefit from this behavior of specifying what to do with the terminating pods. Like I can explain the issues, but I think we don't have that much time, but we could take this into consideration.
Could you tag it here in this issue, or tag it here at least if you have it already in a
yeah, I did it to the chat, and I can add it to the notes also.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, we can use it. So it looks like Kevin is taking it over.
I added the rep to the issue.
Okay. Yeah, Kevin is taking it over, but we're collaborating closely, so I should be able to communicate that to him. But yeah, at this point we don't have a design, so I'm pretty much just circulating the idea. But in any case, we're going to start with job. But it sounds like maybe doing it inside of pod failure policy is good enough, or rather the best option. Okay, I think that's it for me.
All right. And Philip, if you wanted to bring that back up for discussion for next issues, we can put you on the schedule for next go round if we wanted to have more conversation on it.
Okay, yeah, I think it could be beneficial to continue if Aldo could also join and to discuss if it could be good to have like a functionality between the workloads with the same API view.
But the API, so we can have more discussion on it, but I'm very much kind of like trying to make the batch workload API look like the stateless serving workload API might not be it. Like, I don't know if that's how rational that is to like.
I don't know either, but it would be good to see if, for example, for some spec top level API to have something which tells about pods or.
Yeah. All right. So we're running over. Thanks everyone for attending, and thank you everyone for presenting. I can link that issue for the next time, Philip, and we can talk more about it. For anybody who wants to reach out to SIG Apps in the Slack channel, always feel free, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.